But just those two is enough to have caused some of the biggest shipping companies in the world to completely avoid the Red Sea altogether. Now, there's an alternative route. They can go around the tip of southern Africa in order to get to the same place at much greater cost, at much greater length of time. Persian Gulf, there is no alternative sea route. There's one way in and one way out. 20% of all the oil in the world travels through that strait on a daily basis. So 20% of daily oil consumption goes through the Strait of Hormuz every day. And from a standpoint of how much of exports, oil exports, it's 40%. So this is a significant amount of the world's energy. Economic activity is directly correlated with energy usage. So if we see a 50% drop in shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, you're looking at potentially 10% of the world's oil supply being taken off the market. And that would make prices skyrocket. Right now, oil's around $75 a barrel. As of tonight, yep, right now, 75.88 is what it's at this moment. So we could see oil prices go up into the triple digits very easily just from the threat of this. So we'll see if they follow through later tonight. If the Ayatollah says, yes, we're going to do this, all they have to do is just launch a missile at a ship. That'll send the price of oil up. They don't have to hit it. Don't have to sink it. Just the threat. That threat alone is going to be enough if it's persistent for long enough that it will shut it down, that shipping companies will say, no, we're not going through there. We're not going to take a tanker with 1 to 2 million barrels of oil on it that no one wants to insure and ship it through this narrow waterway, because at its narrowest point, it's 21 miles across, but it's not even that. The amount where ships can fit through is really just a 2 to 4 mile wide area at its narrowest, and easily within range of drones and missiles from Iran. And again, people would say, well, no, the US Navy will stop that. They have not succeeded in 18 months in stopping Red Sea shipping traffic from being hounded by the Houthi rebels. And again, when that started, we made the point, there's only two ways they could stop the Houthi attacks. One, they could nuke all of Yemen. Yeah, just destroy it all. Number two, they could launch a ground invasion and go house to house and root out all those who are firing missiles and drones at the ships until they've conquered Yemen and made sure that that won't happen anymore. Neither one of those was an option that politically or in the eyes of the world, the United States wanted to pursue. The same is going to be true here. The only way, if Iran makes the decision, we're going to do to the Persian Gulf what the Houthis have done to the Red Sea, the only way that can be stopped would be an invasion of Iran, a ground invasion of Iran. And I don't see really, Israel doesn't have that capability. The United States has that capability. Do they have the political will to do that? I don't know. And I've heard all sorts of people say, well, no, this isn't going to happen because Iran depends on its own oil exports. They'd never close the Strait of Hormuz. Well, again, they're not closing it. They're just harassing the shipping. And why would they fire missiles at their own oil exports? They wouldn't. Those are going to be allowed to freely pass. So that 30 to 40% of Red Sea shipping traffic that's been there, for the most part, is Chinese vessels, Russian vessels, those who are friendly to the Iranians and on their side. And so the same thing is true here. So China receives an enormous amount of oil from Iran, and they're going to want to continue receiving that. And the Strait of Hormuz can be shut down for the purposes of what Iran wants to achieve without hindering those shipments of oil to China. And if Iran says, you know what, we'll continue to sell you that oil, China, at today's prices, regardless of what the world market says, well, I'm sure China would be in agreement with that. So China is not going to stop this. They have no reason to stop this. In fact, China and Russia and others, and we'll talk about in a moment, have every reason to support Iran in this conflict. And so there's really no hindrance to them doing this or stopping them from doing this. Again, we hear a lot of threats and a lot of bluster coming from the United States, coming from Marco Rubio and Donald Trump on if Iran tries this, then we're going to do all these terrible things. They said the same things to the Houthis, and it still continued. And so why should we expect that this is going to be any different? Again, it's the only sustained success Iran has had for the last 2 years. I would be shocked, absolutely shocked, if they do not pursue this option. It's really the only card on the table they have left. Conventionally, they cannot compete against Israel and the United States. We're seeing how that's going. At least in a head-to-head conventional war, but in a war of attrition, which we'll talk about in a moment, that's something totally different. So, and then of course, in the midst of all of this, so we have the United States. Marco Rubio's come out and he's said, we're urging China to dissuade Iran from doing this, from shutting the Strait of Hormuz. We don't want them to do. So it's clear they see that as a viable threat. They think China will do this. That remains to be seen. The Houthis have since come out after their attacks have lessened in the last few months, and they've said that they're going to start attacking U.S. ships in the Red Sea. So, in the Gulf of Aden as well. So we'll see how this moves forward. But guys, one of the things that people need to understand in this conflict is not over. So thank you. I will see what I can. I don't know that I can do that live, okay. But later I will. So Jenny just handed me a question. So what we need to understand is, what is the end game here? So as we were returning from taking our daughter to camp last night, we're driving along, and that's when we get this news of the U.S. attack. Jenny first saw it on her phone. I
actually saw something before you did.
She did. She was so I was driving. She learned of this attack. So we turned on the radio. And the radio had, I believe it was Sean Hannity and Mark Levin were the ones speaking. This is the most fantastic victory for Trump. Trump's this great leader, all these wonderful things. 4 decades of Iranian tyranny and sponsor of terrorism has come to an end. I'm thinking, has it? Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that Iran is a bad guy here, and we need to have this reign of terror come to an end. But this is celebrating victory prematurely. So an objective has been achieved. So Israel had an objective. The United States had an objective to bomb these nuclear facilities, to end the Iranian nuclear program, or at least set it back many years. According to what they tell us, they have achieved that objective. And there are other objectives as well that they haven't necessarily been as clear about, that it said they're still pursuing. But achieving that one objective does not end this conflict. It does not end this war. And you keep hearing all these people saying, okay, well, we've achieved this objective, and now it's time for peace. Or just a few moments ago, I was reading Netanyahu, the transcript of a speech he gave where he said, We're not going to allow this to be a war of attrition. We're going to achieve these objectives we have set out, and then we're done. Well, that's great. But what if Iran's not done? so, so as long as the regime remains in place, the United States and Israel are not in a position to determine when the war is over. They can say our objectives have been achieved and we'd like for it to be over. But if Iran continues to attack, then the war is not over. And they're going to have to continue to engage in that conflict. And that is why we're hearing more and more. We heard earlier today, Trump sent out a Truth Social post about regime change in Iran. This has to become their objective now. And God willing, I'm going to put together an article on Tuesday for the Substack on why that is. Because otherwise, this becomes a war of attrition that becomes very difficult for Israel and the United States. Now, no doubt the Bible tells us Israel survives this. But that doesn't mean that what we've seen this weekend or this past week is the end of this. And so we could continue to see ballistic missiles incoming into Israel for who knows how long, weeks, months. How many interceptors does Israel have? The Iron Dome is wonderful and effective, but it's not 100% effective. Some of these are getting through. Some of these missiles are even hypersonic missiles that are getting through. And we're seeing destruction in multiple cities throughout Israel. Israel is small, very small compared to Iran in terms of not just landmass, but population. And Iran, even though this aerial bombardment's taking place, they could be resupplied by China, Pakistan, Russia, all sorts of other allies that they have. How long can this go on? And how long can Israel afford to continue moving down this? So Israel is going to want to wrap this up very quickly. And that's why the objective, I believe, is regime change in Iran. And that's what they're going to be pursuing. Well, that creates an issue because now we have an enemy. We've been told, again, all this bluster that I'm hearing from a number of people who are claiming mission accomplished, victory achieved, is that Iran is not powerless. Iran is weakened, but they are not without options. And now you have a regime that's fighting for its very survival because they know now, well, the objective in this conflict is regime change. It's to get rid of us. So they're going to use everything they have at their disposal in order to prevent that. So what are some of their options? Well, we've heard about sleeper cells, cyber attacks, but I believe the ones that should be most concerning to people, the number one most concerning to me is this scenario. And I haven't heard really anyone talk about this. All these missile barrages going toward Israel, what if they redirected those to oil production and processing facilities in the Middle East? So right across the Persian Gulf from Iran is a site called the Abqaiq Oil Production and Processing Facilities in Saudi Arabia. If a successful missile attack took out those facilities, we would lose 5% of global oil production for months. What if they simultaneously took out other oil production infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq? What would be the implications of that? Because so much of this oil production is even closer, it's in a shorter range than Israel is. And we've seen what they've been able to do with Israel. And Israel has this Iron Dome system. There's no such system protecting these oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. To take those out would cripple the global economy instantly. And it would cause financial black swan event that, again, we talked about that yesterday's video on the Substack. We don't need to get into all of that right now. But this is the Achilles heel of the West, is the financial system. We've talked about how the economic power of the United States gives the United States the ability to project its power around the globe. And that ability to project power around the globe helps give the United States this world's global reserve currency and the economic power and might that it has. It's a symbiotic relationship. And both sides of that are under assault right now. This is a real possibility. We had, as part of the Houthi assault on the Red Sea, so I believe it was a little over a year ago, the USS Gravely was within a second of being hit by a cruise missile when its last line of defense took that cruise missile out. So the idea that the US Navy will be able to move right in and dominate, yes, if they're going up Navy to Navy, sure, I think the US Navy would win that fight. But we're talking about a different type of fight. And, one of the things Jenny and I talked about last night, there's this scene from Gone with the Wind, where it's right at the beginning of the war. And all the Southern gentlemen are gathered together and they're sharing stories about how quickly this war is going to be over. Oh, we're going to sweep through. It'll be over in a matter of weeks or months. Clark Gable's character is standing over the side saying, wait a second, guys. I've seen the industrialization of the North. They're not the weak opponent you think they are. And again, I think there are a lot of people that are underestimating the capabilities of Iran and what they could do. What happens if a carrier group goes in to defend the Strait of Hormuz and a hypersonic missile goes through the deck of an aircraft carrier? That's a possibility. They had a war game 15 years ago at the Pentagon. It was this exact scenario. And Iran launched a preemptive strike with cruise missiles and took out half the naval assets. And they stopped the war game and they said, wait, no, do-over, that would never happen. Right? So we've got a lot of people that think, well, this couldn't possibly happen. The United States is dominant. The United States can't fail in these things, but we need to be careful and understand this war is not over. The Ayatollah remains in power. This regime remains in power. I believe the objective of the war going forward, if it wasn't from the very beginning for Israel and the United States, is regime change. And so that will be what they pursue. But again, short of a ground invasion, that's going to be very difficult to achieve. And then you get into the scenario of how long does this go on? And as it becomes, the longer it goes on in duration, the more difficult it becomes. And Iran has a lot of options, again, to close the Strait of Hormuz. Again, they're not closing a gate that doesn't allow ships to go through the waterway. They're simply harassing the shipping of anyone who's allied with Israel